Everything we know, from people and ants to stars and galaxies to quarks and atoms, the entire universe, might just be a simulation running inside a supercomputer inside an even bigger universe. Ancient philosophers said that the universe is a dream that we're waiting to wake up from. In this dream world of the imagination, anything is possible. All cultural items, from the dreams of our rodent-like ancestors, to books, to television shows, are merely permutations of the reality we think we live in. Today's age of computers and video games places simulations at the center of our cultural consciousness. A select group of us perform simulations for fun and profit, and we call them games, role-playing and otherwise. We live to run simulations. Join us on the Simulationist podcast as we explore our culture of simulations.
Okay, hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Simulationist podcast. The is important. It is October the 4th. I am Josh Trelevin.
I'm Ryan Kirkby.
And we are talking about more simulationist stuff.
Yes. Should I open up with the main question then?
Okay, let's get right into it. Go ahead, Ryan.
All right. This one's going to go into the techniques of your simulation and your fiction. Character creation time. Some places, some games like it short. D&D Next, there's been an explicit thing. You should be able to make a character in less than an hour. Other games have favored a longer character creation time. And they say it helps add uniqueness to the characters. Understandable, I suppose. What's your quick take on it?
My quick take on character creation, I do agree that, I prefer there to be a quick way to do it. Like for your standard game, I guess if we're talking about a D&D game, the standard way, it should be fast. Like you should be able to get playing. I personally am a fan of, I've seen a few of these in examples in play, where there's a bit of character creation that goes on after you start playing. So at least you get into the structure of doing your game and having your fun, and then you can add on to it that little bit of what might be called extraneous or prep or whatever, stuff that you kind of need to do, but it's not actually playing, and then you roll that into playing, so it becomes part of playing.
That's pretty good. That's interesting. See, I've always seen it to be a double-edged sword no matter which way you go. I mean, the short stuff, it's quick, it's easy. It's easy to get someone who's never played in there if you can get them to make a character in 5-10 minutes. But you start running out of options. If you have only 5-10 minutes to create a character, you're not going to really create someone wonderfully unique. You're going to create Bob the Fighter version 24.
Well, that's true. There are definitely going to be bugs in your character if you create it really quickly and don't put a lot of thought into it beforehand. I think I fall down on the side of shorter character creation just because you can always work those bugs out and you can always add to your character later.
Well, that's not bad. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do like short character creation times. I recall one guy I used to game with. He would never have the same character for any 2 episodes of gaming because he couldn't remember his character sheet. Somewhere out there's a stack of character sheets, probably about up to his kneecap, of just characters he just played once and then forgot for the rest of eternity. It got to the point where we'd have to take the receipt from a quick grocery trip before gaming, and then we'd roll the stats, we'd create the character on the back of the sheet, because that's all it would take. That's all the importance it had to his character.
Well, that sounds very appealing to me because it gets you into the action right away.
Back into the action quickly.
Yeah, exactly, back into the action. And the one thing that kind of my theory of role-playing games too is that I feel that characters ought to be you ought to be able to let go of your characters. Of course you want to put effort into them, but also if something bad happens to your character, it shouldn't be too much of a big deal to just say, okay, new character, that one's dead, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I actually hadn't considered that. I mean, I do spend myself a lot of time on my characters. I like crafting them, I like tweaking them. I like finding, fun ways to make them slightly different than what I've done before. And yeah, when I lose a character, it tends to hit me, I guess, harder than the average person, because I did put the time in there.
Yeah, and, well, of course, if we're talking about gaming in particular, then it's something that the dungeon master and the players kind of have to have a sort of an understanding on, or hopefully they acquire an understanding on how long-lived these characters are going to be, because there are ways because the D&D universe is a lot like the comic book universe. Like, death is not the end.
It's not the permanency it used to have to it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the DM's job, too, is to make sure that death feels scary and feels dangerous, but it's not, it isn't the end. It isn't really the end. But the characters have to still be afraid of it, so you walk that line.
Yeah, until the point where it becomes effectively like 2 minutes in the penalty box at the very high end.
Well, and that can be... so you're saying that's the game style is that you do like 2 minutes of the penalty, then you're back out.
Well, in comics and especially in higher end D&D, that is kind of how it becomes. You're dead. Okay, you'll get better tomorrow.
Well, okay, yeah.
I, on the other hand, for death in particular, like the tri-stat system. I'm not sure if you know it. Very few people do. It was a nice Canadian contender to the D20 system, but the company went under due to financial problems. They had it so that you're conscious from max health to 0, and then from 0 to negative max health, you were unconscious. After that, it was something serious. But you never died unless you were willing to let the character go. They might be in a coma. You might just say they're seriously injured. They've got a permanent scar now. But they didn't die unless you were willing to let it go.
Oh, I see. I think, you know what, and that's cool that they encoded that. My thought before you just mentioned that was that it was something that the DM could kind of handle behind the scenes and didn't have to be a out-and-out rule. But when you describe it that way, I think an out-and-out rule that it's up to the player when they die kind of does make sense. And it's basically the same thing. It's just codifying it.
Which I definitely liked. I do have a nice fondness for some of the stuff they were mentioning potentially for D&D Next. Nobody dies in combat. If they do hit their negative hit points and they go down, they're dead and dying, but they're not dead. If a cleric can get to them before or just by the end of the combat session, they're back alive, technically. If there's no healing spells, if there's no way to somehow stop the hit point loss, put them back up to the positives by the end of the fight, well, then they hit death.
Okay.
So that way you don't have the in combat, oh no, I've got to really hurry and stop this before he's dead. You can focus on the combat. I'll get to you once we're done kicking this ass.
Well, that sounds like an interesting way to handle it. And the only thing I'd say about that, though, is that I think what it is it's just making the actual gameplay experience kind of more what always happens. Because kind of realistically in previous editions, 3rd and 4th and previous to that even, I didn't play anything before 3rd, but in previous editions of D&D, the effect at the end of the fight was that it almost always ended up with this status at the end of the fight ends, and then so many people are lying on the ground bleeding or whatever, and you have to go attend to those people. You kind of do a triage. And there were occasionally these moments where you're counting hit points and making death saves and so on. But most of the time it was just that some people are up, some people are down. And I think with this next, it's just saying, okay, that's how we're going to do it. Rather than have a corner case of people counting down, it's just some people are up, some people are down at the end. And I like that. It makes it simple. It kind of plays the way we actually have been playing it for all these years.
I think it just simplifies. Now, mind you, of course, this might not be how things go come the end of everything and when it actually gets published. But I did find that to be a very nice and, I guess, elegant way of handling it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I will miss, if I end up playing 5th edition, and if the certain parts of Death and Dying are not incorporated, I think I'll miss them. And I'll think, well, it would be nice to bring that death save back or whatever.
I do admit I've always wanted to be the one person potentially left at the end of a horrible battle, naturally make my save, naturally heal up until I'm conscious again, and then go about, the whole healing process at like 2 hit points. But that's never come up. It's such a rare occasion where something like that would come up that it's effectively beyond what you would ever expect to encounter as a player.
Yeah, and that goes back to the idea of what what you're actually trying to simulate in a game, and do you want to simulate every possible aspect of battle and fighting, even the things that kind of rarely happen and so on.
It's nice to be covered under the circumstances. I mean, no one ever expects that outcome to happen, but it's nice to know it's there in the rules somewhere.
Okay, and that's a funny thing with the rules, because a lot of us kind of grew up reading D&D. Well, I grew up as in like after I turned 20, then I started growing up. But I grew up reading the rules for not just for the fact that we're going to play the game, but also just for fun, because we were interested in it. And because this world of D&D was just so like magical. This world where it simulates, it's kind of like a real world, but there's magic and so on.
That's not bad. I like that. Yeah. And I do believe that is how most people get into any one gaming system. They find themselves intrigued by the setting, at least, the premise of it. And, I guess it's not until they've read the whole thing that they might find, oh no, I've been duped, or yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah, well, that's too bad. And that might be whole other discussion to have about how deep you got to be into the rules before you actually get a game and are able to make a judgment on it.
Which is, once again, why I actually like the tri-stat system. It doesn't have a setting. It's a variable where you can work for any setting. You want to be pirates on the high seas. You want to do your pseudo-medieval. You want to do a superhero thing. You want to do like a Lovecraftian horror at the turn of the last century. It's all there. It's all allowed. The system is the system, and it tailors itself to you.
Well, that sounds good. I mean, I've only read a little bit of Tristat, but we can recommend that to our listeners, and we can also, I can look into it a bit more too.
Have fun trying to get the PDF. The PDF for it was actually free and distributed freely to help combat the D20 menace that was taking over everything back in the 3rd edition glory days. But I think you can still find it. I believe White Wolf owns the rights to it, but they haven't done anything with it.
Okay, well,
so they're probably not going to sue you if you download it somehow.
What I'll do is I'll do some research after we're done recording, and if I can find a link to it, I'll include it with the show notes that I'll put up with this podcast.
Okay, but here's the thing, circling back into my original question.
Okay, yeah, back to the
question. The Tristat system doesn't have classes.
Yeah, okay.
It just has you choosing a role, you choosing what you want for abilities, for powers, for style. And it has more than one way of accomplishing almost anything you want in the game. But in the end, you can't just take the class at first level. You have a set amount of points you have to work with. So would a longer character's generation system be inevitable in that sort of thing? Or would you just effectively try and, rip off, I'm a low-powered copy of Superman, and just try and run with that?
Well, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I guess not every player is a writer, not every player is a novelist, but I mean, I think we all have it in us to do, national novel writing, and NaNoWriMo, which is coming up. We all have it in us, whether we're writers or not, to create characters and to create stories. But can we create an original character? I don't know.
I've actually found in the online playing I did back in the day when it was still a fresh current system, everybody was able to come up with somebody at least unique. I had some very interesting characters go by my eyes. People that were just they wouldn't stylize themselves as writers at all, but came up with just the most intriguing characters, stuff that you just don't see in the comics. It was a superhero theme.
Yep.
And it was just like nothing you'd seen in the comics. And it definitely beat the generic person who can take a hit and then fire off blasts of energy from their fists.
Well, that's good.
Which, let's face it, actually covers a decent part of all the characters created in the 90s. It's sad but true.
Yeah.
All you had to do was add pockets to them and it would have been a 90s character, every one of them.
That's good. I wanted to I'm not sure if we finished with your original question because, I mean, I answered rather quickly that I thought that faster character creation was preferable. Do you have a case for longer character? Is it just because it's like natural, like because simply our nature is to want to be able to tell the story, so just give people as long as they want to flesh out their character?
Well, I've always preferred a system, like even D&D, because let's face it, there's a number of splat books you can go through, slowly perusing to see, okay, I think this might fit the person, this might work out well, oh, hey, here's a prestige class I might want to work towards. And so in that case, at least there's research time associated with the characters you create. But I like a system where you find out how the character creation is going to go down, what level it is, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and then you create your character before you meet up with everybody. So everything's ready, you put it down on the table. You might work with a vetting system, have one of the other players go over and take a look, make sure what you've done is on the level, you didn't make any errors, and that way everybody's on the table, character sheets down, let's get ready to play.
Okay, so you basically spend as much time as you want, and that's the system as far as that's concerned is basically flexible. If you wanted to make a fast character, you could.
Oh yes, you could definitely make a quick, straight out of the book character if that's what you want to play. And don't get me wrong, there's some very fun things that can be done with a person who starts off as just being a generic person, and then you flesh them out as gameplay goes on. I've had some very good characters start off with, do I have to be the fighter again? And then, next thing you know, I'm a dwarf who absolutely goes nuts for mustard. There's not many spices down there. I suspect mustard would be incredibly wonderful for dwarves. And that's how I played it. But here's the thing, perhaps the character creation time depends on the style. Because it suddenly occurs to me, the Shadowrun game,
yep.
They typically had an A, B, C, D, E, where you choose your race, your class, well, magic aptitude. Either you were a magician or you were something else.
Okay.
Or, and other things, how much money you had to start with, how many skills you had to start with, how many points you had in your stats to start with. And that worked out quite well. But then they had a secondary system where the points all break down. You have to start off with about 100 points. Each skill point costs this much. Each attribute point costed this much. So if you really wanted to tailor a person so that they didn't have just the generic grouping level of skill points, you could make that work. Yeah. It did take a lot more time, though. But if you were the kind of person who was into it, go for it.
Yep. Well, and so I can't really think of a system. Unfortunately, my role-playing experience is not as broad as I'd like it to have been. I mean, I've played a few. But anyways, I can't think of a system that I've played that's extremely long, in-depth character. Like, it requires a lot of time spent creating a character.
Well, I can just say off of the top of my head, it seems that stuff with classes and base levels do work quicker towards a fast generation time, whereas point-based systems do tend to be much more close about the finagling this and that and how you can use your abilities. Okay, I can cast a fireball, but only if I'm facing west and it's afternoon.
Right, and when you get into that stuff, it's almost like you're not playing the game, you're playing the game design game.
Which is not to say you can't have fun with that. If everyone's fine with that, go for it.
Well, I imagine that, again, it can be something that you could, if you wanted to spend a lot of time on, you could. Or you could be the guy who says, no, I'm just spending 10 points on punch, and punch.
I can punch 10 times as well. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So do you think that it's possible to have a single system that can cater to both the people who like the fine level of minutia and the people who like the, okay, I start, now I'm done, let's go.
Wow, well, I mean, I think that's what they're trying to do with D&D Next. They're trying to be this kind of all things to all people kind of game.
And God bless them for trying, but I do not envy the designers at this point trying to make it work.
I think your question is it possible? And I think my answer, whenever I'm asked something like, is so-and-so possible, it's just, yeah, it's a problem that you just have to work on and design around. So in that case, one possible solution to creating such a game that has an option of slower or faster character creation is you just build examples into it. You have the tools for a very intricate or fleshed out background that could take a long time for character creation, but you might also include several or hundreds of, or probably several archetypes that are already done for you, so you're ready to go.
So the option of the pre-made characters.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Which I do advocate, especially as the DM on any given area. It's always nice to have a backup character, NPC you can slip to a player character who's being downed.
Yeah.
Oh no, the paladin's down. And then, oh hey, suddenly the personality of the torchbearer just kind of like the paladin, at least until he recovers.
That's brilliant. It's just so. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't say it's elegant because it's a little bit clunky. That the torchbearer had these ambitions all this time and no one knew. But
he had to focus on holding a torch and not getting shot at by arrows.
Right. But what it does is it solves your problem.
And it does actually come up to an interesting style where when someone, bows out from the scene, it's another chance for someone else to step up to the plate, so to speak. So it's not like it's completely unrealistic.
Yeah, and well, it's an exciting enough story to see this person like, if it's done well. I don't want to say if it's done well. It's an exciting enough story to see that torchbearer just become heroic for some reason, to make me forgive the unrealisticness of it a little bit, which is odd because I often take a hard line on realism, but here I guess I feel that's fine.
Well, I think it's like one of the things you see here and there often enough in your various TV shows or whatnot. Oh yeah, the background character suddenly becomes the forefront. The Steve Urkel, only ever supposed to be a next door neighbor who makes occasional appearances, suddenly winds up becoming the brand new star of the series.
Yeah, well,
if you can remember that, some of the younger people out there might not know what the heck I'm talking about.
I think probably. I think we all have stories of characters like NPCs or characters who we didn't expect to make an impact, but the players latch onto them, or the DM has discovers that he can do a particular accent well, and so that character becomes important,
notable, memorable.
Yeah,
it's like the one opponent for some reason nobody can hit, not because they're super hard to hit or anything like that. It's just everybody who rolls against them rolls so poorly. All of a sudden the generic monster becomes something special and mysterious.
Oh yeah, at least as far as the mythology is concerned. And part of that, I mean, obviously D&D is kind of mythology, but there's also this game element to it where the DM has to, in his own mind, he has to decide, okay, am I going to keep this monster by the rules and just say, he was just lucky, but fortunately the characters think something different, the players think something different? Or is he going to go in the back of his mind and say, oh, there's something special about this monster, maybe the gods are in his favor or something, he has a divine bonus or something like that? I don't know, do you think, would you go either way on that, or would you just play it by ear when you got there?
I tend to roll with it and then come up with some sort of explanation. I recall one case of an unhittable, I think it was one of the green skins. I think it was a hobgoblin. That just the paladin couldn't hit. Everyone else kind of squares up against their opponent, and then it's left over with him and the paladin, and you can't hit it. And everyone else tries to take a swing. Nobody hits him. It's just bad rolls. There was nothing great. I mean, they were lucky they weren't rolling ones, is how low they were going.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden I just had the the guy just rip open his shirt and there's this weird tattoo on his chest, and everyone goes, that's the reason why he's using protective magics. And that completely excuses their horrible attempts at rolling.
Yes.
Didn't give them any bonuses, but at least there's a reason for them to explain why they're sucking all of a sudden.
Well, no, and that's part of the fun. That's fun of gaming, yes.
The unpredictability. I mean, if it wasn't for unpredictability and the fun of it, why would we even have dice? Just take the average and use that every time.
Well, there are diceless games, although I prefer the dice games.
Even the diceless games do tend to work down to at least a game of rock, paper, scissors. The Mind's Eye Theater actually comes to mind for that. So I like it. It's a good system, especially when you're LARPing and you don't have a flat surface to roll the dice on all the time. And that prevents on lost dice, too, because if you're outdoors doing that sort of thing, you're going to lose something. And it's going to be a die 4, and someone's going to step on it, and then you're going to get blamed.
Although I like the idea of a die falling in the mud and then being buried for 1,000 years, and then 1,000 years from now, like, our descendants dig it up and they say, aha, we knew it, they were gaming.
So you're saying if anybody wants to get out of the hobby, they sell their books off, but they take their dice down to the nearest marsh and just throw them in?
That is my well, actually, no. My first suggestion is send your dice to me and, let's see.
Create a hoard?
I will hoard your dice for you. Yes. But my second suggestion is yes, do something crazy like throw them in a marsh or bury them in the foundation of a new building or something like that.
Ooh, I like that. Oh, but bury them, and make sure they're not all side one up. Otherwise, you're just dooming the building to failure.
The building will have bad luck.
It can't keep a single tenant because it's all ones. It's just horrible. Whew. Spooking me out there, man. All right, so what's your big question for this episode?
Let's see. My main question. Okay, I guess this is switching gears. What happens when money meets gaming? And when I'm talking about where is the line between gaming and gambling? Gambling is something that we all do. I do. I gamble. Like I
lotto tickets.
Buy lotto tickets, and I put money in slot machines and stuff like that. It doesn't feel the same though as what we call gaming, which is more like telling stories.
Which is not to say you can't tell a decent, compelling story on the penny slots. I've encountered some penny slot stuff like fighting aliens during it, and I was very entertained.
That's a good point. Yeah, the slot machine games I've played are flashy and exciting, like for a second, but then they seem to they go away, they disappear to me, and I just focus on the money. I don't know why that is. Like, not necessarily as money.
Because you have the heart of a gamer. You ignore the flash, you ignore the fluff, you focus on the substance, the numbers, the system.
I think I do. Yeah, which is, I guess the flashing lights and the loud noises are designed to attract you in the first place, but are they designed to? I don't think they're designed to hold you in. What holds you in is the system.
Yes, or at least the potential win of money.
Yeah.
So then, are we indirectly saying that gamers can't experience stuff like slot machines the same way a normal person would? Because we're focused and knowledgeable enough about systems that we start analyzing it as we play?
Well, I've always believed that human beings are all much like each other than we give them credit for. So I think that in the case of, your average person who doesn't play video games or other games, who goes into a casino and maybe that's their entertainment or whatever, I think that their brain works that way. I think that their brain is initially attracted by the flash and the shiny noises and
the lures
and such. But I think the human brain gets caught into that the numbers thing rather quickly, and that becomes the addictive factor and what holds you in.
But then again, would the average person be able to know the die chance breakdown results of 2 die 6?
Well, I don't think they have to know it. Well, I might be wrong about this, but I don't think they have to know it. I think that the brain just it sees numbers going up or numbers going down or numbers, it's not. Let's see, if you think that you're analyzing it, that's enough. That it's enough to think that you see a pattern. And a lot of what happens with gambling is that people think they can see a pattern. They look for patterns. Especially, the Keno boards. Have you ever seen those?
Yes. Available at every local Lotto 649 location.
Yeah, and I think that ties into very, it's weird that mathematics would be elemental like that, but I think, I could be wrong, but I think that it is. I think that it's not math like the way we, not exact math.
Not pure math. It's statistical math and probability.
Yeah, it's pattern seeking. It's that our brain is looking for to be able to predict what number is going to come up next. And it's something I think that we all do, whether or not we are into math or whether we think we are into pattern seeking. I think it's something the brain does naturally.
Well, that would work well with our alleged hunter origins. Notice the pattern, find out where something is going to be, so that's where you can strike.
Yeah.
But I've always found that the math works the other way for me. Probably the biggest reason I haven't gone into craps is because I know that chances of rolling a 7 is 6 out of 36, or, a 16.67% chance, whereas rolling the 11 for the 7 come 11 is a 2 out of 36 or 1 in 18 chance, slightly less than 5%.
Wow, and I don't even know those numbers, but I do know that any game, well, I guess partly it helps that I've worked in a casino before, but any game in a casino is stacked against the players, which is fine because casinos have to make money, and a lot of that money does go to charity or whatnot.
And every once in a while a person does wind up winning big. You cannot deny that.
And it's possible to win. The more you play, the less likely you are to win, which is funny. But
I suppose if you had the more greater knowledge of the system and the mathematics behind it, you could find a game less rigged against your favor.
And I think they've done. Some people have done analyses on it, and there is a game. I can't remember which game it was, but there is a game which pays out almost like 49 to 51 or something like that. It might be 21 or blackjack.
I've been told blackjack is the most favorable, although because of how the system works and how the dealer works with their draw, they are slightly more inclined because people cannot be trusted with their money, and they will make bad decisions and say, "Hit me on a 20."
Yeah, exactly. Like if you played blackjack perfectly, your odds are you will come out 49 to 51. Like the house will have won 51% of the time.
You'll very slightly lose.
Yeah. But of course, most people don't play perfectly, and I imagine even a person who knew how to play perfectly would make mistakes and basically just send more money the casino's way. And of course, in that case, the casino would be, even if someone won, they have all the other people losing. So,
yeah.
But what was I going to say? There's this thing where gaming, when it involves money, when it's a little bit of money, it's kind of fun and stuff. But at some point, it crosses a line, and maybe this is just Hollywood's pictures of gambling, but we get this idea of gambling as kind of dangerous, and if the stakes are high enough, people get killed over it, over a game. Like, how does that happen?
They don't get killed over the game. They get killed over the money they owe because they did not play the game properly. I think the evils of gambling works along the same way as the evils of drinking. Yes, most people can handle it perfectly well and do not wind up becoming a problem with it. But there's enough of that subpopulation that winds up spinning out of control that they wind up hurting themselves, others around them, because of it. And I guess in that case, it's just a judgment call as to whether or not you think you know what, it's just not worth it. Let's say nobody does it. It's evil. Nobody gambles.
And yeah, obviously certain governments have made that decision, and I think our government controls gambling very carefully.
Oh yes, especially for the more perceived neutral stuff, like the one-armed bandit slot machines, where nobody really thinks about putting maybe a quarter or two in, if that's the kind of thing. I mean, I've got 3 dimes in my pocket. If I was to walk by a slot machine that had a 10-cent thing for it, I'd consider spending that. But because of the people who have the problem gambling, it's like offering free smokes to someone who's trying to quit smoking. They just can't resist. And so, yeah, I can understand why they do prohibit it from being everywhere.
Yeah.
Although I would like to see like a province of Vegas instead of just the one city. What if it was spread out all throughout the province or all throughout the state?
Well, it'd be hard to walk down the strip if it was an entire state.
You could make it a week-long thing. Get your complimentary drinks. That's where you spend it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so another thing I wanted to ask about gaming, see if we can just, solve this problem forever, is what, like, when it comes to gambling, like I had this thesis, that gaming is a simulation. Like you're making scenarios and you're seeing what happens. And gambling seems to have that on the surface, but it also seems to have a deeper level of its real life. It's basically, actual money is changing hands. And so are we really simulating anything there, or is it just another way to put wallpaper on what's really going on in real life?
Well, I find it interesting because when you say how it works, when you compare the two side by side, you're effectively trading dollars instead of hit points around.
Yeah.
So.
And dollars which affect your actual, those
your
are actually
financial
your
life.
Dollars, yeah.
So then maybe you could stop a problem gambler who's also a gamer from gambling too much by having them associate their cash when they start out gambling with their hit points. You can't go worse than -10, and after that you're just breaking the rules. Follow with the system, buddy.
Well, that might be a way to do it. I don't know if just saying there is a rule against this. I mean, there has to be a consequence attached.
Yeah, you go broke and they break your kneecaps.
Well, that's a little bit. It's funny because that's a little bit removed from the actual what happens in the
game itself.
Game.
That's more of the meta game.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say. There's I like the term, the meta game. There is a meta game with gambling that's
counting
real.
Cards and seeing what your odds are for the third ace on the river.
Exactly that sort of thing. Trying to figure out what's really going on with the game.
So in that case, when you get deeper into the gambling, it's more like min-maxing in gaming. Weird.
Yeah, that's I don't know. That's a good analogy, I think. It's an exciting, fun analogy.
If you're caught min-maxing too much in your game, the DM reprimands you for it. If you do it in Vegas, then they throw you out of the casino.
Yep.
Whoa.
Yep. So I wonder too, now we've just kind of looked at the casino's kind of effect on games. Do you think that games affect? Let me see. Do you think that role-playing games have an effect and can influence things like casino games? Because I think there are fantasy-themed. Well, I know there are fantasy-themed games, with a princess and a dragon and things like that. But is there a way does role-playing gaming have an influence on gambling, do you think?
Well, I know when I was in Vegas, I was much more inclined to waste my money on the slot machines when it was pseudo-medieval style. And that I had the chance of slaying the dragon and winning the horde, which was getting the jackpot. in that case, I perceived it as being much more favorable because of my gaming nature.
Well, that's cool. But do you think that's the... I suppose that's just what it is. It's the casino companies, the companies who make the slot machines, kind of knowing what sort of person, like you're a certain type and you enjoy medieval themes and stuff. So they're kind of targeting you with that machine, and they have other machines to target other audiences.
Divide and conquer. Have enough different machines of enough different styles, and you'll get everybody's money eventually.
Wow, those guys are smart.
And ruthless, but not as ruthless as they used to be. Because, mob. So they're not in there anymore, apparently, so yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that.
But I find it interesting, though, because the more we do think about it, the more parallels we're able to find between the two settings, so to speak, the gaming table versus the roulette wheel, so to speak.
Okay.
And I do find it interesting, and it hasn't occurred to me exactly where the overlap might be best blurred. Because I do imagine a Vegas where one day I can sit down at the table and I have a randomly pre-generated character I have to get through a set of circumstances.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they must have a gaming convention in Vegas.
Oh yes, they do. I haven't been there for any.
Yeah.
But I wonder, do they put money on there? Everybody has to put $20 in for a character, and if everybody who survives by the end of it manages to split the pot, so you have so many people picking thieves to backstab at the last moment.
That's funny. That seems like it. For some reason, it seems distasteful a little bit to me to have money in role playing, like real money in role playing games.
Well, it's because we spent so much just getting the material for the role playing games.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like double or nothing, eh?
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the things that I've always loved about D&D games, though, is yes, you spend a lot of money on the books and stuff, but if you compare it to the same hours spent watching movies, playing video games, what else? Going to live performances, if you spent the same amount of hours, you would have to spend a lot more money just on the tickets, for going to those other things.
Oh, yes, D&D is very cost-effective when you're in it for the long haul. If you're a casual gamer, just pick up the basics and stay with that. I've got a number of books I've had for a decade now, and the amount of times I've looked through them or gotten inspiration for something else out of them, I'd say they're definitely worth the money. And that's not something I think you can really put for a lot of other stuff. Movies, yes, you can claim, but they tend to last at the most about 3 hours a piece.
Yeah, and I suppose if you have the DVD, you might watch it 5 or 6 times in your life.
Well, unless it's something like Lord of the Rings, in which case you just pop it in and have it playing in the background while you're doing other stuff.
Okay, yeah.
In that case, you gradually accrue watches just through ambient effect. But,
well, although if you're accruing watches through ambient effect, you're also... the quality of the watches would be slightly less, so you'd have to watch more to make up for that.
Well, yes, that's why you keep it on repeat.
Okay, yeah.
That's like the old Nosferatu one that they had. They re-released it, I guess it'd be about 10 years ago now. Because it was a silent thing, they had Type O Negative, the band, playing their music over top, and it was basically something you play, and you could just generally see a scene here, see a scene there, you'd be fine with it. No dialogue, you're technically not missing out when you're just hearing the rock and music go.
Yes, Nosferatu.
Oh, I'd show that to you, but Travis borrowed it, and now he's on the other side of the continent.
Okay, well... Yeah.
I'll have him send it back sometime.
Yeah, I still have some movies to get to watch.
I got a list myself, but yeah. But yeah, I find that interesting when you bring it up, the cost effectiveness of it, because you can enjoy a movie, and yeah, okay, it sounds much better for them when you see it in the big screen and you have that surround sound in the theater. And there's always something, if it's a good crowd, even a mediocre movie can become so much better simply because of their reactions in it. The people who jumps at every fright, the people who gasp in horror when you do, it does create a nice groundswell to enhance the emotions. But at the end of it, you've paid $10 for 120 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
And you don't get to keep the movie when you're done. As opposed to going down to your local Walmart, paying $5 for a copy and owning it forever. So I find that interesting.
And then gaming is obviously a different dynamic when it comes to what you're spending and what you're getting out of it.
Especially because if you are in it for the long haul, you can buy a book you don't necessarily use right away, but 5-6 years down the road, it's the perfect thing. So yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And yeah, you've had it all along. Like some sort of after-school special. It was with you all the time.
Of course, the other thing about gaming and basically any small hobby is that it can also be almost like a pyramid scheme. Like, basically, it might be changing, but let me see. With films, it's the case that people go in to a movie theater and they don't ever expect to themselves write a movie or produce or direct or act in a movie. I guess some people kind of foster dreams of acting. I think that's a pretty common thing because they identify with the actors in the film, so it makes sense.
Or they don't identify with the actors and say, I could do better than this guy.
Yeah, so that's the counterexample, but I think overall, I think people don't expect to participate in filmmaking. Whereas with gaming, with video, or let's say with role-playing games, a lot of the people who play it are also armchair designers, and also they want to write their own adventures. I guess it's not everybody, but it's a higher percentage than it would be in something mainstream like film.
Which is why, D&D, I think, has had such a wonderful run throughout its time, is because of its inclusivity. And I think we saw that best during the 3.0, 3.5, when their SRD was, everybody, come along, let's all have fun. And there were books by everybody, books by more than everybody on everything.
The 3rd edition Golden Age.
Hey, you never know, we might be going back to it. They haven't said anything positive or negative about what they're doing with D&D next, so it might be a little bit more allowable than what they had for 4th edition, so cross your fingers, knock on wood, maybe we'll get something good out of it.
Of course, the Pathfinder Golden Age is still going on right now.
Well, yes, but it doesn't have, I suppose, the same gravitas as the Dungeons & Dragons system did. When you were using the D20 system, you were using the Dungeons & Dragons system, so you had the history of all that behind you with you as you were doing it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. There's something emotional about, the brand, the actual Dungeons & Dragons brand. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, when I got published in the Sword and Sorcery Studio stuff for the Scarred Lands, I was ecstatic because, hey, not only is it professional, it's using the gaming system. Not a gaming system. There's no quick thing rushed off by the Palladium guys for a quick one-off splat book. This was the gaming system of the Dungeons and the Dragons.
Yes. Well, that is really good. And of course, now, when you get into a hobby like gaming, you can do a podcast about it. I suppose they do podcasts about film, too.
Well, I think that trickles out to the internet and the great democratization of everything. I mean, you have communities of people now going around stuff that you wouldn't normally have historically have had the same sort of group of people doing the stuff. You have the fan fictions being produced out. 15 years ago, maybe you could have gotten something put in your little Star Trek e-zine that you read, but it just wasn't the same. And now you've got these huge communities of people writing stuff up, making fan characters that everyone loves, and doing stories that everyone's hearing about, and is actually making waves.
Yep.
Just think if it wasn't for the internet and the fact that everybody's starting to work with this inclusive principle, we wouldn't, for better or worse, have the 50 Shades of Grey series. It's starting off as actually fan fiction for the Twilight series.
Okay.
They just changed names.
Oh yeah, no, I heard about that. I have not read 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, I have yet to read an excerpt, but I'm willing to give it a chance. I'm willing to give almost anything a chance.
Yeah.
And just one chance sometimes, but a chance. But, I really like how the internet has helped for the inclusive principle. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were groups and communities before the internet that did have this inclusive, let's all share style. like as I mentioned, especially the Star Trek series.
Yep.
They had their magazines, their fan mags, that, Paramount was very nice at letting them use the names, the characters. They didn't have to. They could have been lawyered up and just to the gills to protect their intellectual property, but they didn't do that. And I think that's really why the original series managed to gain such a good cult classic following.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, you might be right about that. I hear that about other series, too.
I do know that the Star Trek people maintain, like, if you send a script for something like that, they'll actually catalog it away in an archive.
Oh,
They
really?
are that inclusive, yes. That is what I've heard. I've seen stuff on the TV talking about it, and I've seen it. It looks quite beautiful, if somewhat yellowing with age.
Wow.
Some of the manuscripts are kind of old.
If I ever have a studio one day, I'm going to take that as my example, and just, if I ever have enough, like, fans, or if I'm involved in a project, let's say, like that.
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, I don't think you could really do something these days without having, making contact with the fan community and their ideas. I think everybody's better off for it. If someone points out this one thing, it's like, oh, hey, you were doing a short skit, or you made a mention in this episode here, but you're completely wrong. However, here's a solution for it. Then you just include that in with it. They're providing the problem. They're providing the answer. It's acknowledge it, man. Go with it.
Oh,
Fans love it when you acknowledge them.
That's good. Well, fans, if you're listening right now,
Hint, hint.
send us lots of email. We will, as soon as we start getting some email back, we will start reading them. And
But not the hate email, although I may be inclined to actually print the stuff out and put it into a binder. A big hate-filled binder of spam and anger.
so we will put up our email addresses on the show notes.
Yes. When we got everything settled out and set up. Should I go on to the next question?
Okay, let's have another discussion.
All right, my secondary question is languages in your fiction. By and large, within the D&D setting at least, the languages are just very generic. You can describe the Dwarven language, or at least its alphabet is very stocky, something you'd chisel with, like a hammer into stone. You can describe the Elven language as flowing and soft, but you really don't have a lot more to it than that. They don't even have different names. It's the Dwarven language, the Dwarven alphabet. The English language, well, no, they don't even have that. It's just the common language. Everyone's speaking English, but they call it common. They don't have the level of interconnectivity you see in the real-world languages.
Interesting note, I want to mention, I looked this up some years ago, but, the German language, which they call Deutsch, that word, Deutsch, for German, it actually means common. It means the common speech. And it's the original meaning of it. So because it was compared to Latin, basically. So Latin was like this kind of high language, and then Deutsch was the language that the people spoke, the common language.
See, this just reinforces my belief that instead of having a pseudo-English setting for the D&D system, we should have a pseudo-Germanic setting.
Oh, I don't think it would take that much to change it, really.
More monsters in the woods.
Monsters in the woods? Well, there's definitely, that can be done in D&D.
More things involving blood, cooking, pools of it. They were quite gruesome in the Grimm's original tales.
Ah, yes, Grimm's.
So, some extra rules for bloodshed, and I think you'd be okay. Other than that, I do believe there to be a different tone from the English side of the tales, with its associated Scottish and Irish folk tales, as opposed to the Germanic and we'll say Eastern European, oh my god, what is that and why did it eat everybody sort of monster.
I guess that's true. I mean, when I think of England, I don't know that much about England, but when I think of it, the kind of iconic, it's like, there's pastures and sheep, lots of sheep, grass, a few trees here and there. Generally not too dangerous. There's no wolves in England.
Not anymore.
I suppose
they used to have lions in the area. Not anymore. In historic times, yes, there were.
Well, that would explain why they have a lion on their royal standard.
Yes, it does answer a few questions. But then again, when you picture something Germanic, you picture something like small villages settled amongst the woods. There's streams going right by, windmill going on there, a nice stonework bridge, and otherwise that, big wilds, dangerous wilds to go out in. You don't have the same sense of calm. You have more of the points of light sort of style that they had in the 4th edition.
Yep.
Whereas if you're not in town, someone's keeping watch or you're going to get eaten.
Well, I like that. I think my ideal game setting would be something like that.
Pseudo-Germanic.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can have a dwarf named Oscar.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that always weird. Like that's so weird that dwarves are always Scottish. Like why are they Scottish and not?
Because everybody can do a Scottish accent. Not everybody can do Germanic.
Okay.
But although when you think about the dwarven mindset and how they keep being portrayed, you do see the industrious nature, clearly, of the German stereotypical people.
Okay, yeah. If we're talking stereotypes, yeah, I can see that.
Yes, whereas, let's face it, the Scottish stereotype does not involve so much hard work, but it does involve more alcohol. Which, I don't really see the same way, for the dwarves. I see them drinking, but not to the stereotypical excess of, drunken louts everywhere.
Right. Well, it's almost like the Bender from Futurama. You have to drink to stay sober.
I fully approve of that for dwarves. And actually, it feeds in with the whole setting for the Slaves of Armok series, Dwarf Fortress. Dwarves have to stay liquored up. Otherwise, when they sober up, they start moving slower, they start feeling bad. It's only when a dwarf is sick and injured will they ever drink water. Or, I guess, dying of thirst will they consider drinking from a stream. I do like that. It adds an interesting thing about that. The dwarven system needs alcohol to survive normally. They wind up acting drunk when they start sobering up.
Well, it's funny for a moment. I mean, I'm all for that. For the gags alone, I'm all for that. Dwarves must drink alcohol, but it's funny for a moment. But then it's like, okay, that's enough of that.
I think you could have a lot of fun saying dwarves have to drink, alcohol the same way a human has to drink water. If they wind up drinking only water, they start suffering the same penalties as if a human was drinking alcohol.
That's fine. That's good. That's a way to do it. But my argument for not using that is basically that it devolves into because it's jokes about dwarves getting drunk and being, like all the stereotypes that we associate with people drinking alcohol. But if alcohol doesn't have the same effect on dwarves, then it's not about getting drunk. It's just, they just have to drink this other substance. It doesn't have to be alcohol. It might as well just be, they have to eat so much asbestos every day, or they have to.
I imagine dwarves would have used asbestos as their clothing.
Asbestos clothing, probably, yeah.
But, let's just figure this as a different way. Let's create a race of deer people. They're just people with the head of a deer. But they have, like, the digestive system of an herbivore. They can't eat meat. Does that seem ridiculous? Does that seem like it might devolve into jokes about them being, like, green eaters? Like, we can say that these deer people can. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's go back to those rabbit people I mentioned a couple episodes back.
Okay.
The Nepalese rabbit people. They can eat. They can just eat the grass. They don't actually have to take daily rations out with them. They can forage for it, and they automatically succeed and eat the grasses.
And they eat their own poop.
Potentially, yes. They are hindgut fermenters. If you want, because they're rabbit people, we can switch that around, make them foregut fermenters, and they don't need to do that.
And,
mind you, I am a biologist. I do know the differences, and I can work out the first run, second run sort of stuff. Oh. But, if you want, we can work it either way for these Nepalese rabbit men we keep talking about. But does that make it seem like ridiculous? Like if they were in a storehouse, like trapped in a warehouse of sausages and aging meats. Meats need to be aged, say about 28 days, is it?
Oh, okay.
It's 24 to 28 days as the average meat gets aged for tenderization.
For sausages, for making sausages.
No, it's just regular meats. Your standard cut will have been aged at about 4 degrees above freezing for about a month.
Okay.
Unless you want to go with what XL Foods has done, in which they needle sterilize, in which case not sterilize, tenderize, in which case they poke it with needles to tenderize it. But there's a big recall on that because the needles weren't sterilized. So there's
topical.
Yes, topical. It will become vastly unknowable to everybody else in about 6 months when it all blows over. But that is why they naturally age meats, and they like it that way. But if you had your Nepalese rabbit men trapped in one of these aging warehouses, and the doors will not open for another week or 2 weeks, they'll starve to death because they can't eat the meat. So I think it provides some interesting alternative challenges.
Yeah. Oh well, I'd say so, and I'd say, you know what, I'm going to say go for it. I'm going to say we'll go ahead and use those kinds of, like, dwarves can only, or in certain universes,
settings,
in certain settings, dwarves must drink alcohol to live, and Nepalese rabbit people can't eat meat. And it's funny that we that's what they are now. They're Nepalese rabbit people. But anyways,
until we come up with a different name for them, I think we're halfway to creating a new race.
Oh, yeah.
We've come up with enough culture. We've come up with enough styles. There's a hook for them.
And you're talking about literally creating, because we can, how to do genetic manipulation. So
it's a little outdated, but I still have the manuals and all the stuff here.
Okay, so coming to a nursery near you, Nepalese rabbit babies.
I don't think I actually would do it, though.
No.
Why do that when the money is clearly in the domestic dragon, Dracus domesticus, and then everybody can have, I guess it'd be a cat-sized reptile that wanders around with useless wings that flap around. Would you not buy that sort of pet if you had the option?
It depends. If it was because I know monkeys are supposed to be a lot of trouble, and everybody says, "Oh, I want a monkey," and then
that's why the smart people say, "I want a monkey butler." They've been trained.
Somehow, I imagine a monkey butler is still not going to be the most behaved, even if it is a butler.
Yeah,
I'd rather have a human butler. How about that?
Well, then you have to pay them. I think one of the great joys of a monkey butler is that you don't have to pay them, you just have to feed them. And if you try that with a human, it's called slavery. Which is an interesting blurred topic when you start thinking about intelligences.
Yeah, in a fantasy world where there's a range of intelligences, can you have a goblin slave?
How about gnollish slaves? I mean, they're only, about 5, 6? They are not smart things. And I imagine they would be at least as difficult on the average household as a monkey butler.
Wait, when you say 5, 6, are you talking age, height,
their intelligence?
Or intelligence?
Their intelligence score, I believe, is 5, 6, somewhere. It's low.
Their age 5 and 6? Okay. They're 5'6", or...
Well, I suppose, given how quickly they breed and how violent they are, 5, 6 might be considered an adult age for a gnoll.
Yep, which is another weird ethical issue that comes up in D&D, but okay.
Well, actually might explain for a decent amount of creatures as to why they're so crude, why they don't have a civilization, is their old age, is at age 30.
Yeah.
They reach the age of maturity at age 6, and they just are not going to consider 12 years of education followed by post-secondary.
Yeah, because they'll be dead after that.
Why spend your... on the other hand, they might do it just to, mess with the system. It's like, haha, I'm going to accrue massive student debts and then die of old age when I graduate.
Oh.
I could totally see goblins doing that. They strike me as just smart enough and just malicious enough to make that work.
Yeah, I feel like we're getting racist against goblins, though, saying they shouldn't have their affirmative action.
Well, it works the other way. I mean, figure this though: an elf, doesn't really hit maturity till age 100. That's when they're considered to be a full-grown adult.
Yep.
They could completely have gotten several doctorate degrees and then paid them off by the time they finally hit young adult status. They do pay for it by spending 7 times as long as a human in diapers, though.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, think about that. Let's say you get toilet trained, age 2, 3? Supposed to be these days?
You're the one who's going to be a dad. So.
I don't have to know that until at least 2 to 3 years from now.
Oh, okay.
But let's say a kid gets trained age 3. If it's an elven kid, times that by 7, they don't get toilet trained till age 21. Harsh. Yeah. Everybody pays their dues in one form or another.
I suppose. I mean, why doesn't the rulebook doesn't talk about that for some reason?
No, they really don't decide to go into the whole ages at 1/7 speed. But yeah, everybody has their own penalties to pay in the game setting. You know, sometimes when you're in your mid-20s, you're about ready to collect social insurance. Sometimes when you're in your mid-20s, you're finally learning to use the bathroom like a big boy.
Well, that reminds me, though, there is a scene in Tim Allen's The Santa Claus, which is, it's an okay movie. It's kind of old, and it's just, I don't think it stands up now.
I think it's a decent holiday flick.
Okay, so the only reason I bring that up is because there's one particular scene where he meets an elf who's like played by the actress is a little girl, and the elf looks like a little girl, and he's like talking to her, and he says, "Oh yeah," something like, "Oh yeah, you're a nice little girl," or something like that, or she refers to something like having had some experience, and he says, "How can you have had that experience when you're so young?" And she says, "Young? I'm 100 years old." So there's this. To me, that one scene kind of clicked for like, oh, how elves could be like 100 and yet still be like not fully grown, like still look like a kid.
I think it works well in describing, at least in the other end of it, the elven beauty. They are frequently said to have ageless beauty. So I've always taken that to be that despite the fact that you see it different in the movie here and there and in their comics and whatnot, that elves stop physically aging when they hit their age of maturity, we'll say. And then until the time when they decide to wander off or die, depending on whatever setting you have, they just continually look to be that age.
Yeah, which is something I think they tried to do in Lord of the Rings. I remember Hugo Weaving played Elrond, and he's supposed to be
7,000 years old.
Yeah, like this ancient guy. And he's also, just that actor has this kind of quality to his look that he doesn't really have an age, like he doesn't look like a certain age. I
will say I think they specifically chose actors and actresses that would age gracefully for stuff like the elves.
Yeah.
Simply because they knew this is going to take 3 years before it's done. Then there's a lot of other stuff we could potentially involve them in, tangential things here and there. Let's make sure we come up with somebody that doesn't wind up just going to pot overnight like some actors and actresses do. Not naming any names, it tends to be much more of a personal call for anyone than something else. But
or they get into a car accident like Mark Hamill or something.
Oh, I was thinking more like Bill Murray. I mean, he's a great actor. Love him to pieces, and I will back anything he does. But he is not the same man he was 20 years ago.
He's an ugly old dude now.
I wouldn't say ugly. I mean, the fact that he's not doing the dry humor, the sort of I don't care sort of look, and he's actually smiling, makes him a little bit more beatific, and the white hair adds to like a halo effect. But he's not the same guy he used to be. Jack Nicholson is not the same man he was 20 years ago either.
You don't think? I don't know. Jack Nicholson.
He's holding it up very well. But you can tell he's not the same guy that was in Easy Rider. He's not the Joker. He's not whatever his name was in the werewolf movie.
Wow, now...
Or the Witches of Eastwick. Where
I know you're not old and Easy Rider was before your time.
Technically, that doesn't mean I couldn't watch it. It just means I didn't catch it in the theater.
Okay.
But, yes, I mean... Well, okay, we'll go with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He was the lead star in that one back when he was young, and I think we can say everybody saw that, or at least part of it. You've seen something like that on TV, a clip here, so they mention it in a news story, whatever.
Yeah.
So you remember the smile that got him the role as the Joker. He's not doing that anymore.
Well, because he's not playing the Joker.
But he still smiles. He just doesn't do the Joker, big smile grin anymore. He does the more, I'm happy with my life smile.
Well, I don't know. I guess we don't know if he's happy. I mean, we can assume that he's made lots of money and he's famous.
With his family, and he's doing...
He's got a family.
I see him with his family activities. He doesn't have the body he did back then either, though. It was on a beach. He's not the lean man. He's
the beach photo of
it happens. It happens to everybody. Honestly, I still think he's looking great for his age, but he's not the same guy he used to be. And I think that because with the elven actors, they had to go with someone who had an ageless look to them.
So they couldn't pick Jack Nicholson. Listen, if you're listening, Jack, we love you. So
I think he would have made a great Gandalf, personally. Yeah, imagine that. Go through the entire movies in your head and put Jack Nicholson in there.
Well, it'd be a very different film. Although, one of the things they've mentioned about, that's been brought up about the Lord of the Rings films and also the upcoming Hobbit films is that the book characters are actually a lot older, not just the elves, but also the dwarves and the hobbits are a lot older than the actors. Just because Bilbo's 111 or something like that, or 11-1.
Yes, I remember that. They specifically did mention that.
Yeah.
But it's always the sort of thing where they age more gracefully than humans do.
Yeah, but also in this upcoming film, Thorin, the dwarf king, he's supposed to be, 200 and something, 200 years old?
He's still considered somewhat young by dwarf years.
I suppose, yeah. But the actor looks like, I can't remember now who's playing him.
Mid-30s, what do you think?
I think he's older than that, but he does definitely not senior citizen type.
He does not look like a 200-year-old man.
Yeah.
Because he's not playing a 200-year-old man, he's playing a 200-year-old dwarf, which is equivalent to...
No, that's a good point. That's quite true.
Okay, how about Jack Nicholson as Saruman instead of Gandalf? I think he could do a... Yes, there you go. Him as the villain.
See him. I want to
Could he make waving a staff around seem actually magical, or would it just be Jack Nicholson playing as a weird role? I think he could pull it off, honestly.
Well, I guess either way, it's fine.
I think if he puts an evil malice in his grin as he's doing that to Gandalf, I think he could sell the scene.
What about Jack Nicholson as Gollum?
Oh, no, that's
probably couldn't do all the physical stuff that Andy Serkis does, but
I'm imagining him doing the voice, and I think he could have played the Gollum better than they do portray Gollum. I don't think he would have made as good a Smeagol as they had him in the movies. Because there is a person. I think there's enough personality differences that you can define the two as being different. And based on some of the scenes, there does seem to be the two different personas: the harsh Gollum versus the more benevolent Smeagol.
Yeah. Well, it's that. I don't know if I like that entirely either, because I've always thought that Smeagol, he's obviously not as evil as Gollum. If you're taking them as separate characters, but I still think Smeagol has an evil streak in him. I still think he's kind of a nasty guy.
That is why he killed Deagle, mind you.
Yeah, exactly. Smeagol was the murderer. Before he even got his hands on the ring.
Yes. He just saw it and he wanted that thing.
Yeah.
But I figure it like this, is... Smeagol is the actual person that started, whereas Gollum is the persona that developed for his survival instincts. If you hear them talking between each other, as you can, because they do refer to themselves in the plural person, is you needs us, sort of thing, and we're the reason you survived.
Yeah.
So the Gollum would be a constructed personality, a survival mechanism.
At the same time, I'd say that Smeagol would have to be also a constructed personality, and maybe this will allow the Smeagol to be the redemptive kind of the character with something good in him, because that character splits and basically constructs an evil side in Gollum, and then everything good somehow constructs also a good side in Smeagol, even though Smeagol is originally kind of a bad guy.
So then the splitting off of Gollum would have been a galvanizing of Smeagol, a purging of the negative aspects of himself.
Well,
to create the Gollum.
I guess it doesn't really work like that, but I like that idea.
I've been told that it's not exactly unheard of in the realm of psychology.
Okay.
I don't know if J.R.R. Tolkien was actually trying for that, but that is definitely how they presented it in the movies.
Yeah, and that's funny too, because I don't think that pop psychology split personality stuff had come out. That was an era. Was it even before Freud, or was it the same era as Freud? When the
just
Lord
post World War I sort of thing. I imagine the trauma he saw, because J.R.R. Tolkien was in World War I. He would have at least had some first-hand experience at seeing something like it, because Lord knows that war damaged more than bodies.
I guess it's a possibility. I wouldn't say it's for sure, but I think you have a point that it would be possible for him to have seen something like that.
The trauma and the people,
personality.
splitting themselves. It's like, okay, no, I'm the soldier that kills the Hungarian menace, the Austro-Hungarian. That was an empire back then.
Yeah, and I suppose really kind of multiple personalities goes back, to ancient times, and
whether or not that's how they perceived it is another question.
To get off more on a tangent on multiple personalities.
Oh, trust me, we are so far off of the question.
We were talking about languages?
Yes, we are so far off the beaten track. It's a good thing we have a record to see how we got here.
Okay, so, but I was going to say, I think that multiple I think it's an idea that may, I think I'm reversing myself from before, because I said before that I didn't think it was a thing, but now I'm saying it is a thing. I think it's a thing that arises from the way we actually do, we're hardwired to think about personality, and that this idea of multiple souls or multiple beings inside a person. I mean, demon possession, that's an example of it, right?
Oh yes, I think it would be an excellent example, where it can be perceived different ways based on the kind of person you are. So that's a very interesting one to bring up.
I'm trying to think of more examples. There was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but that's probably more modern, really.
I mean, you can make a decent argument with Two-Face in the Batman comics.
Well, again, modern also.
Yes.
We're talking post-Freud, kind of. And I think a lot of the examples I can think of are more modern. Maybe werewolves might be an older example.
I always thought they had more to do with the paganistic religion. The people that put on the clothing and dresses as the animals sort of thing. I mean, on the one hand, it sounds like, yeah, okay, that's a werewolf, become an animal. On the other hand, doesn't it sound a lot like the druid class in D&D?
Yes, it does. It sounds like a person who can change. But then you have to ask, do they, in the medieval mindset, without having modern psychology or, Freud to read or these novels about split personalities that we have now, if you imagined a person transforming into an animal, why wouldn't their mind also transform? Why wouldn't they also become more bestial in that change?
Well, I think that is how they did it, at least until you started getting those weird later Victorian stuff where it's like, oh yeah, every full moon they turn into a dozen werewolves and then they just go hang out. Yeah, there was some stuff going on about that.
Oh, I thought that was modern, Twilight era.
No, actually, there is a historic precedence for them to do that sort of thing. The original stuff about your lycanthropes was more, yes, it did emphasize the bestial nature coming out. There's a lot you could say about symbolism in there. But, later on, along with, I guess they evolved, so to speak. Vampires were originally really just ghouls. It's just how they started off within the stories. They dug up out of their graves, they came and they started killing, the person, and their family. their loved ones. That's
they
why
couldn't turn into bats or become gaseous form.
No, that was all added in through story writers, and they had it up to a point where vampires were completely normal in the day. They only gained powers at night, but they could still go outside in the daytime.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That's
so. I guess the gentrification of the beast.
Or maybe something like that, yeah. And, I mean, that's the difference. I mean, a druid is like a werewolf in that they both shape change. But a druid is also, like, stays in control of his mind. And in that way, like, basically, if you go back to, like, history, it's not too easy to distinguish between, like, if you had a druid, a wizard, and a cleric, like in kind of real life, and as long as the cleric wasn't necessarily a Christian cleric, maybe a pagan cleric, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell which was which. They'd probably all kind of have, maybe they all could shape change or like that sort of thing.
Interesting. So here's a question. How come in no setting I have ever encountered for D&D there has ever been mention of a wild war where it's druids versus lycanthropes?
Like an entire nobody's thought of it yet. That's a great idea. You should copyright that right now.
Well, there we go. I've got auditory evidence of it. So there's a back history. All the lycanthropes are evil, and yeah, that's just how it goes. There's a big war going on behind the scenes in the woods.
Oh, that's
man
really
to
cool.
beast versus man to beast. Yeah, I can totally run with that at some point. Yes, back to the original.
Are we going to finish our thought about languages?
Well, I think we can just wrap it up fairly quickly if you want. Okay, as I was saying, the languages are all effectively language isolates. There is no sort of relatedness.
Yeah.
Like French, Italian, and Spanish all have a very similar style. You can kind of get the gist across on most words because the verbs have very strong roots in most cases. So why isn't there, some sort of like intelligence check DC 10 to understand the core, gist of what the person is saying in language A if you know related language B or C?
Oh, well, I mean, for one thing, that's complicated, and it might fill up like 5 pages where the text allotted in the book is only half a page for the language skill.
I don't know. I think I just summed up the rule for the whole thing in
you'd have
about 2 sentences.
Yeah, but you'd have to make a table, I guess, of which languages are related to each other.
It's a short table. I remember in Shadowrun they had a list of all the real world languages and some of their extra fictional ones put in. Okay, not all of them because they have all those weird little dialects. But it was just one little column stating, this is your Indo-European one, and here's the relatedness.
Okay.
They could do something like that.
Yeah, I could see that. I have a friend, shout out to Nick, not you, Nick, the other Nick. You know who you are, and if you don't know who you are, that means you're the other Nick.
Nick.
Who he actually did make up a table of languages, and he added a few of his own, like for his own campaign setting, and he said, if you speak these languages, you have a chance of knowing this other language. So he did do that, and it filled up, like, because there's so many languages, it fills up an entire page with the list of languages and which ones they're related to, so it's a table. Then there's rules on the adjoining page, or the facing page.
I like that. It seems like it's just something that you could put out in a small PDF. Doesn't even need to be a splat book. But here's a related bit for it. How about old languages? I've encountered in a few campaign settings, Greyhawk off the top of my head, where they have old languages. You have your Flanish, your old Flanish, and they count as a different language. What about a quick rule for that? Anything?
Sure. Well, yeah.
Now, how does this work for races, given the incredible variety of age differences? Does Elven actually change when you're speaking it for 700 years at a time?
I could make an argument for yes or no. I'm sure I could.
How about Draconic? I mean, the dragons live even longer.
Yeah, it depends, like, whether the dragons, whether their personality is the type to adopt new... Because humans, like, our own language changes over the years. Like, everyone likes to use the example of the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, and because they have readily accessible recordings back from when she was young in the 50s, and they have said that yes, her language has changed over the, however many years. Did we have her 60th Jubilee recently?
Yes, it was the Diamond Jubilee, so 60, I believe.
Yeah, so over those 60 years of her reign, her language has changed. Now, if she ruled for 600 years, her language might change so much that it wouldn't be mutually intelligible.
So then, if we'll say the English people are elves.
Yeah.
Okay, all the Brits are elves, which means we'll say about 400 years should be your expected lifespan. And then you hit your venerable age, and who knows when you decide to go wandering off.
Yep.
So let's just take an analysis of this. Very few people know how to speak the English that was spoken in the 1600s.
Yep.
But then we'll say the French people are humans in this case. Would that mean that... how does that work? Do the British elves have to constantly relearn this French language that keeps changing every 20 freaking years? Okay, I suppose French is actually a bad one for that, given their desire to preserve the word. I should have switched it, but too late.
A different language that changes. That might be... I'd say that could happen in a campaign world. That could be part of the dynamic of the interrelations between the races.
We propose a trade agreement so long as you guys quit using new slang. Dang. Oh, wait, can't use that one. Yes.
And that's true, and I think that parallels kind of actual history fairly well, because we have had our share. It's always a fairly small number of pedants, or people who insist on certain ways of speaking. And also there's this slightly larger undercurrent of middle-class people who think certain things are supposed to be said a certain way, but they're kind of not really right. And they don't really follow the rules, but they think they do.
How about factors such as the Great Tonal Shift? Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Yes. For those there listening who haven't, English used to be spoken much more towards the back of the mouth than the front. In it, you wouldn't put your foot. You put your foot in your boat instead of putting your foot in your boot. And I believe one of the leading causes was there was a nobleman who had a lot of public personality, who spoke differently because of a speech impediment, and everybody took it up, and that's why the English language is so horrible, and nobody knows why you can write a word one way, but it's pronounced a different way.
Yeah. Well,
popularity.
I think that it is the case in some areas. Basically, England has a large variety of dialects within the country, and if you also include Scotland and Wales and Ireland and Northern Ireland, you get all kinds of ways of speaking, some of which do preserve those old ways better than others.
But for instance, if you have the Scottish accent and you can learn the Scottish accent, you're one step ahead on learning the Scottish Gaelic, because you know how to put the proper emphasis on certain words that you may never have actually encountered before.
Yeah, although I wasn't necessarily speaking of Gaelic, but yeah, that's true.
It's just one I know from experience.
And there's also the tale of I think it's apocryphal, but in Spanish, they had a particular king who spoke with a lisp, and after that, everyone else adopted it.
So that's why all the Spanish people, Spanish-speaking people in Spain actually speak with the lisp, as opposed to the Latin American Spanish who have more of a harder style?
Well, I don't think that's really why, but that's one of the apocryphal versions of why that is.
Because that would actually make some nice sense, because I've always wondered why the differences between the same language, one of them was a little bit more of a lisp than the other.
Yeah, and that's just one thing that's been advanced, because other people have also wondered about this strange thing, and I think it's just something that happened kind of accidentally. It's just kind of regionalisms just developed.
Nobody ever purposefully changes a language and makes it stick.
Yeah, as much as we wish we could make Esperanto the standard world language.
I'd be happy with just paring things down to about a half dozen.
half dozen languages, just kill all the languages.
Well, no, just make them the half dozen, major trade languages. I mean, you can't deny that Mandarin Chinese is on the upswing these days. So, make that one of the languages. French is actually spoken in a decent amount of the world, so you put that in there. Same with Spanish. With English, there's 40 or 6. You can put Russian in there and we'll have a wild one. Changes every 10 years, just to keep things fun.
Well, that sounds like a great fun project for someone to do.
We'll make a table and we'll roll on it randomly every decade.
Yeah. Although I think what's happening with Mandarin is this is what I hear, is that it's going to be Romanized. Like, there's the pinyin system.
Yes.
But it's not too far in the future. They're gonna lose characters. People are just gonna forget them, and it's just gonna be pinyin, the Romanized version.
Well, I think simply because of how the keyboard system works. If you can reduce everything down to about 26 characters, that's the way to go. Yep. That is why they even simplified the languages. They decided that, having 2,000 different individual characters just doesn't work in a modern context.
Yeah, and that's an example. I mean, we're talking about the written language now, but they decided that they were going to make a change, and I guess because they're a totalitarian government, they were like, okay, we're doing simplified Chinese characters from now on. And this would have been in the 50s, I think, when they
actually still do split between the two. Although if you only ever learned on the new simplified stuff, you can't really read the old stuff.
Right. Well, because parts of the world, like Taiwan, still use this traditional, but mainland China decided that they were going to do simplified. So anything official is always going to be in simplified.
And it does work apparently very well for advertisements.
Yeah, I can believe that. And in some ways, like, I think that it is an improvement because somebody actually sat down and thought to themselves, oh, okay, how can we make this simpler and easier to write and easier to remember, and so on. I
do like that aspect of it. It does show in the language, and I do believe that's a very exceptional case, though, where you'll ever see purposeful alteration of a language.
Right, and I think it only worked because, like I said, because they're totalitarians.
Oh, actually, here's another one. The International Writing System for Proper Chemicals. That's technically a sub-language of its own, but they did rigify the whole thing, so you know the difference between the chemical structures based on how the name is.
Well, that's good, and that's true also because Latin is still used, like a pseudo-Latin is still used in naming
pseudo-Latin-Greek combo.
Yeah, in naming species and other things.
Although the people who came up with the term for Stephen Colbert, the disease, fungus, germ, whatever it was they named after Stephen Colbert, would say there's still room for new and fun combinations.
Oh yeah, I think that's true. But it's the Latin alphabet that's used.
They did use 2 extra I's at the end just to make it look proper for a microbial life.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's interesting, though. Do you think a game would benefit from having these interrelated language rules, or do you think it would just be more or less cumbersome?
Well, I think it would be cumbersome. Unless that was the Dungeon Master's other hobby, basically, because I think it's just a lot to, as with everything else in D&D, it's a lot to learn, and you can delve into heraldry, and you can delve into history, and you can delve into this
military tactics.
Yeah. You can delve into all these things and bring that to the table. So the same way you can delve into the language and bring that to the table. I don't know why D&D made it so simple in the rulebook. I think it's just because they don't expect people to be experts.
I think the basic rule system did it simply because it made it really easy for you making up your generic home system. Yeah. Whereas if you look in any of the other specific settings, they will have specific languages with names other than common.
Yeah, although, well, like what I was saying about the Deutsch, German language, I like that basically brought me around to saying, okay, common as a name kind of makes sense, because that's what they probably refer to it themselves as. Like, it's just what it is.
I've always preferred it as calling it the trade tongue.
Trade tongue I like, but trade tongue doesn't feel like something that everybody speaks. It's like, maybe merchants speak it, and if people have to deal with merchants, they know a little bit of trade tongue. But trade tongue is something that you wouldn't grow up speaking, for example. It wouldn't be your mother tongue. You'd have another mother tongue, which would be good.
Well, I mean, that makes sense for everybody but humans then, because all the other humanoid races start off with racial language and common, plus others according to bonus intellect.
Yeah.
Whereas then all you need to do is create a human language, and humans get it for free. Then you're done.
Yeah, but
switch common for trade.
And that would be good. I think that would be good for some settings, because if you want to emphasize the mercantile aspect of the setting and things like that, you want to say there's a trade tongue. But if you wanted to emphasize other, like not emphasize this isn't mercantilism, or say that there's a dark age and there's less trade going on or something like that, maybe a trade tongue is something that they lack and they would have had if there was more interaction going on, but maybe it's lost.
And if I'm not mistaken, I recall one campaign setting you were running where we were trying to get some gemstones cut, and we had to deal with a dwarf that didn't know common. And I found that one to be very entertaining. Just trying to figure out how to talk to the dwarf when no one spoke dwarven and the dwarf didn't speak common.
Yeah, wow, I don't remember that specifically. I probably wouldn't do that now, though.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. In the end, we never went with that dwarf, because I suddenly had a metagame inspiration realizing languages is based off of intelligence, and so is gem cutting. So if he can't speak, anything other than his basic language, he's probably stupid. Let's go find someone who speaks a dozen languages and thus can cut gems much better. Although I did try to not play that as part of the game, it did occur to me in the metagame.
Well, it's and I've always, that's a good argument about the languages too. I've always found that I haven't been able to satisfactorily run a game where there are different, where people don't understand each other, because it's just frustrating. It's just, we just want to communicate. Because the game is about communicating, and if you can't do that, you're not starting. You're at square zero. You're not going anywhere.
And yet, I have a fun memory of that incident.
And I'm glad you do. And also, that's what I like to talk about with Simulationist, because that could be a game in itself, but it's just it's a problem to be solved. You have to think about this language problem, not just straightforward, roll a check, you don't understand him, well, now what? It kind of, grinds to a halt. But if someone were to approach that problem from a proper game design standpoint, they could make a mini game out of understanding another character, and that would be fun.
Language confusion. Challenge rating 2.
I want to see.
I attack the language with my crossbow.
I might attempt it myself, but I want to see someone come up with some interesting rules. It doesn't even have to be D&D based, but it could be just like a mini game where you try to understand the language.
I think they may have come up with that, but they called it Pictionary. One person cannot speak your language and yet has to get an idea across.
Yeah. Although I've seen some results with Pictionary, and that can be its own problem. Sometimes it's worse than not understanding language.
So what you're saying is there was a failure in the intelligence check. Someone rolled a 2, or maybe even a natural 1.
Well, there's intelligence. There's also dexterity for drawing. I don't know what drawing would be. A dexterity. There could also be a charisma issue.
Might be a wisdom bit.
Wisdom.
If you know what to draw.
Yeah.
To get the point across.
I mean, Pictionary. Yeah, you'd have to roll 4 skills. The only one you don't have to roll is strength and constitution.
I don't know. What if you draw really hard? Or, decide you're going to try and get this point across by drawing the same thing for 4 hours.
Oh, I can just picture a barbarian just
draw. You will know the gemstones. You make this.
And how do you draw a ruby if you don't have, like, if it's just one color pen?
I guess you could default off a...
It's like, no, it's a red. It's red because I only have it's a diamond, but it's not a ruby. It's
Geez, that does pose some interesting problems. I think that'd be a fun free role-playing scenario sort of thing. It doesn't involve much for dice, but it'd be like trying to solve a trap without a rogue in the party.
Oh, yeah, it would.
How are you going to stop the swinging blade traps without your rogue? And then you just have fun as people lose 1d8 hit points for every failed attempt. Okay. I position myself in the path, and I get my shield ready, and then I tell the other guy to step on the pressure plate, and then I try to tackle it as it comes swinging out. Make your check. No, 1d8 points damage as it goes back in.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best rules, and fun times are the ones you make up on the spot.
Well, yes, I 100% agree with that. But as a nascent game designer, I always think of that as a rules failure. And I shouldn't be so pessimistic about it. But it's I guess it's if you're a player, that's fine because you're still having fun. You're still. And as a DM, that's fine because you had fun, your players had fun. But as a designer, you're like, okay, can I make that rule not fail, or can I take the rule out, or what can I do to?
Well, I think in the end, you can always default it down to one of Gary Gygax's rules of the game. I think it was rule number 1, actually.
Okay.
When in doubt, the odds are 50-50.
Oh.
You either succeed or you fail. Doesn't matter what die you roll. The lower half of the numbers is fail. The higher half is pass.
Well,
unless it's a 2-hit, in which case the other way.
That bit of game design, that's done. Like, he did that, and he's finished it, and that's a good rule. I
think it's a nice coverall for whenever you don't immediately know what you should be doing.
Yeah.
Make a check. Just roll a die. Whatever you think works. You got a 50-50 chance. Which, let's face it, is a lot more generous than some of the rules will ever let you have.
Oh, yeah. And 50-50 chances of jumping, up a 30-foot wall and
of being able to hit the window by chopping off the cord, that was holding up the chandeliers. You go rocketing up, 50-50.
Yeah.
Before, of course, they had the proper skills in there, and it was all based off the secondary optional proficiencies that they had. Let's find out if you can do it. Roll something as you try.
But, I guess, like I said, I guess that bit of game design is done. That's in there. That's in the system. So we just have to emphasize it. We just have to...
Honestly, I think they would have done very well putting up these simple basic rules in, the introductory chapter for DMing.
Yeah.
They don't. You kind of have to hunt down through the Dragon magazines to find them. He's up on a soapbox, I believe, articles.
Okay.
In the
look at those.
High 200s. And yeah, that should cover it on that. But it would be nice if they'd had that set out. Just said, okay, here's the thing. Maybe not rule 0. You do not actually need any of the books.
Yeah.
Being rule 0. So yeah, maybe
put it on the front. Did I mention that once before? You do not need this book on the front cover of the book.
Maybe on the Splat books, they should put it on the inside cover. You do not need this book to play the game.
Yeah.
Even if they only put it in the one spot out of a 10-point font, nothing bigger.
Yeah. So we have gone a little bit over time than we intended, but that's all right.
And we only covered 3 questions, although, boy, did we tangent off there.
We did, and I'll see if I have to edit any of that out. I'm sure it'll be fine. Our listeners, I'm sure... Well, you can tell us if you didn't like it, but...
Although, honestly, I have to ask why you were getting upset that we didn't automatically cover the questions on languages and interrelatedness, as opposed to going off on Pseudo-Germanic versus Pseudo-English style.
Yeah, I don't know why we did that. Okay, well, that's... we'll have to say goodbye for now. Thank you for listening. Send us money.
Good day.